So when you think about America's first real contact with Hawaii, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's probably those stern-looking missionaries arriving in 1820, bringing Christianity to what they saw as an untouched paradise. But that story, it leaves out a massive, massive chapter. We're going to dig into that because for a full 30 years before any missionaries set foot on the islands, a totally different group of Americans had already been there, and they had already changed Hawaii forever. We're talking about the Boston traders.
All right, so let's start with the traditional story usually does. April 4th, 1820. Imagine this. You've been on a ship, the brig Thaddeus, for 163 grueling days, all the way from Boston. You finally drop anchor off the coast of Hawaii. On board are the very first American missionaries, and they are ready to bring enlightenment to a land they believe is just shrouded in total darkness.
And when one of them, Hiram Bingham, looked ashore, what he saw was, in his words, a large heathen village full of shouting and almost naked natives. To him, this wasn't some vibrant, different culture. No, it was just proof of the appalling darkness that he was there to fix. So for them, the starting point was simple. These people were living in a state of nature, completely cut off from their world.
But here's the question that really changes the entire story. Were they right? Was this really some island society that was totally cut off from the West? And the answer? Well, it's a huge no, not even close. To really get why, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. Okay, let's jump back 31 years before the missionaries even packed their bags. We're in a brand new United States, and it is hungry for new markets. They've been kicked out of their old colonial trade routes, so these scrappy New England merchants had to push their ships out into the massive Pacific Ocean, just looking for any kind of opportunity. And in 1789, it happens. The Columbia, a ship from Boston, becomes the first American vessel to drop anchor in Hawaii. Now, the islands weren't the main prize, not at all. They were more like a vital pit stop. It was just the perfect place to load up on fresh water, pork, and vegetables for these incredibly long voyages to the real prize, Canton, China. And at first, the relationship was pretty peaceful, almost idyllic. There was this young officer, John Boyd Jr., who visited in 1792, and he was just totally captivated. He wrote that the Hawaiians seemed to be the happiest people in the world. He loved how frank and cheerful they were. It really seemed like a perfect, harmonious exchange was beginning. But get this, in just 3 years, that same John Boyd Jr. had done a complete 180. By 1795, after hearing stories of betrayals and violent conflicts, his whole perspective soured. He wrote, "I hold them among the worst of savages." So what on earth happened? What turned the supposed paradise into a place filled with so much suspicion and violence? Well, the answer comes down to a single, very fragrant piece of wood. Turns out, Hawaii wasn't just a good spot for pigs and potatoes. Traders pretty quickly discovered it was home to a resource that was worth an absolute fortune in China, sandalwood. And this discovery, it was about to turn the islands from just a convenient stopover into a major hub of global commerce. So yeah, sandalwood was the key. This aromatic wood was in huge demand over in Canton, for making things like incense and fancy luxury goods. And for the Boston merchants who really had nothing else the Chinese wanted, finding Hawaiian sandalwood was like striking gold. It was the currency they desperately needed to buy all the Chinese tea and silks they could haul back home. And this became the engine that drove absolutely everything. It was this complex but incredibly profitable trade triangle. So ships would leave Boston, they'd sail all the way to the Pacific Northwest to trade for sea otter furs, then they'd stop in Hawaii to pick up sandalwood, and then they'd sell both of those in China for huge profits before finally heading home. Hawaii was the absolute critical link in that whole chain. And the trade didn't just grow, it exploded. In the 1804-05 trading season, American ships brought around 900 pickles of sandalwood to Canton. Okay, fast forward to 1812. That number skyrocketed to over 19,000 pickles. We're talking well over 2.5 million pounds of wood. It was a full-blown gold rush, but for wood. This timeline really shows you just how fast everything escalated. In roughly 2 decades, Hawaii goes from first contact to signing these exclusive long-term trade deals with Boston merchants. So by the time those missionaries finally show up in 1820, the islands are already deeply, deeply tangled up in American business. Now, the sandalwood boom brought a ton of wealth to the Hawaiian chiefs, but it came at a staggering cost. It fueled this crazy demand for foreign goods that led to debt, to exploitation, and a massive disruption of Hawaiian society. The kingdom was, for all intents and purposes, up for sale. And you can see that leadership just mattered so much. The great King Kamehameha I, he was savvy. He controlled the trade, he managed the resource, and he kept things pretty stable. But his successor, Leoholiho, a whole different story. He just threw conservation out the window, ruthlessly exploited his own people, and just stripped the sandalwood forest bare to feed his appetite for foreign luxuries.
And this trade came at a terrible, terrible human cost. Thousands of ordinary Hawaiians were forced up into the mountains for months at a time, cutting down these trees and then hauling the heavy logs on their backs all the way to the royal storehouses. It was brutal, forced labor that really only benefited the chiefs and those foreign traders.
The American agent there in Honolulu, a guy named John Coffin Jones, Jr., he had a front-row seat to all this decay. Writing about King Leoholiho, or Reo Reo as he called him, he was just completely cynical. He described a ruler whose god is rum, a guy he had rarely ever seen sober. This was the kind of leadership the traders were more than happy to exploit.
So when the missionaries finally did arrive, Jones didn't see them as saviors. He saw them as a direct threat to his profits. He actually complained that the Hawaiians were becoming too enlightened, and he blamed the hypocritical missionaries for telling them what their stuff was actually worth. You can feel the tension between the traders and the missionaries right from the get-go.
So what exactly were the chiefs trading their kingdom's future for? Well, this shopping list pretty much says it all. We're not talking about just tools or practical goods. They were demanding things like billiard tables, elegant ships, silks, guns, and just massive quantities of alcohol. One chief even wanted a steamboat. They were literally trading a natural resource for status symbols and luxury items.
Okay, so let's circle all the way back to 1820. Let's look at that missionary landing one more time, but now, with all of this new context, what did they really find when they got there?
They didn't find some untouched Eden. Not at all. They found a society that was under immense stress. Honolulu was already a bustling international port. Its people were exhausted, its resources were depleted, and its leadership was trapped in a crazy cycle of debt to foreign merchants. It was a society that had already been cracked and warped by 3 decades of American commerce. And if you need one fact to really drive this home, here it is. The influence was so total, so overwhelming, that by 1823, the Hawaiians didn't call Americans Americans. They called them Bostonians. The name of a single city had come to represent the entire United States. That's how deep this connection really was.
As the historian S.C. Morrison, who is the author of our source material, put it so perfectly, Hawaii had, in fact, become an outpost of New England. The commercial ties had basically created a functional colony long before anyone was even talking about political ones.
And all of this leaves us with one big, lingering question. Sure, the missionaries brought a new kind of American influence, but the foundation, that had already been laid, brick by the traders. So with these commercial roots planted so deeply over 30 long years, you have to wonder, was the eventual annexation of Hawaii just a matter of time?